Some love stories burn fast and fade, but some move slower, deeper, until they change everything. Here, it's not just about passion, it's about the nights that stay with you forever, the stillness between heartbeats, the softness that melts walls built from years of pain, the sacred dance where every kiss holds a promise and every touch carries unspoken truth. It's about the turning points, those rare moments when hope is awakened, vulnerability is met with tenderness, and two souls finally belong. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to not just fall in love, but to live it with your whole being, then you're in the right place. Stay, listen, and let your heart remember what it's been missing. The first time his eyes met in the soft dim light, there was no rush, no loud spark, no dramatic movie scene, only a stillness that seemed to press against the air. It felt as if the world had been holding its breath for years, waiting for this one exact moment to finally exhale. There was nothing hurried in the way his gaze lingered, and yet it reached places untouched by anyone else, places carefully locked away behind years of silence and survival. It had been a long journey through empty rooms and colder nights, a life stitched together with routines that kept the heart from breaking, but also kept it from feeling. And then, without warning, there he was, an uninvited reminder that some people aren't just passing through. Some carry the strange and unshakable sense of home. It wasn't lust that came first, though desire would soon follow. It was something quieter, more dangerous, recognition. The first touch didn't happen quickly. It happened slowly, as if each movement had been rehearsed in the quiet spaces of the mind long before the bodies ever came close. Fingers brushed not by accident, but not yet in full intention, like a tide gently testing the shore before daring to claim it. The silence between breaths grew heavy, not with awkwardness, but with the unspoken truth that something irreversible had already begun. When his hand finally settled against a cheek, the warmth wasn't just skin against skin. It was years of longing melting away, all the cold winters stored in memory, dissolving into something unbearably tender. That simple gesture carried every word neither had the courage to say. There was no rush to move further, no impulse to chase the next moment. There was only this one, and it was enough to make the heart ache in the most exquisite way. Every step toward each other was measured, not because of hesitation, but because the weight of what was happening demanded reverence. Clothes weren't discarded in frantic urgency. They were loosened like secrets, one at a time, each revealing another layer of truth. And each unveiling was met with the kind of gaze that saw more than what the eyes could take in. The body wasn't just being looked at, it was being read, understood, remembered. The way he held, it wasn't possession, it was recognition. It was the quiet certainty of two halves that had wandered in the dark, finally locking into place. Every kiss wasn't just an act of wanting. It was a confirmation, a seal, a vow without words. The taste of his lips carried the weight of 1,000 unsent letters, of every "I've missed you," whispered into the empty air of sleepless nights before this one. And when bodies finally closed the distance, it wasn't fire that came first. It was warmth, a slow, deep warmth that spread through every inch of skin and bone, seeping into the marrow, thawing everything frozen. It was the kind of closeness that had nothing to prove and everything to give. No frantic pace, no desperate claiming, only a steady unfolding, like the slow opening of a flower that knows there's no need to rush the sun. Breath mingled in the dark, not because there wasn't enough air, but because there was a need to share the same breath, to live in the exact same moment. Hands mapped every line, every curve, not as if discovering for the first time, but as if remembering what had been lost. It was less about exploring and more about returning to a place that had always existed, somewhere deep within the other, waiting to be found again. There was nothing performative in the way bodies moved together. It wasn't for show, not even for each other's eyes. It was raw, unpolished, sacred in its imperfection. The rhythm they found wasn't hurried. It was patient, deliberate, almost reverent. Each movement spoke of years when touch had been absent, when connection had been just a memory. And now, here it was, alive, undeniable, flooding every nerve with its presence. It wasn't until much later, when the night had quieted again, that the truth of what had happened fully settled in. It wasn't just a joining of bodies, it was the dissolving of distance. The end of wandering, the collapse of every wall built out of fear, and though the room was still, something within had shifted permanently. Two paths, once separate, now ran side by side, bound by a thread that no one else could see but both could feel. And in that lingering stillness, with skin still warm and hearts still tangled, it was impossible not to know it. This was the moment everything changed. It wasn't the kind of love that announced itself with fireworks or grand declarations. It came quietly, like the soft glow of morning light slipping through a half-open curtain. There was no chase, no store, only the steady unfolding of something that felt inevitable, as if it had been written into the fabric of life long before this moment. It showed itself in the way his presence could still the noise in the mind. No matter how loud the world had been, the second he drew close, the chaos faded into silence. The air between us carried its own rhythm, a slow, steady beat that didn't demand, only invited. It was there in the way his eyes lingered, not searching for something to fix or change, but simply accepting what they found. That kind of acceptance has a weight to it, a depth that makes the heart both ache and rest at the same time. Every touch was unhurried, as though time itself bent to make space for us. Fingers traced skin not as a claim, but as a way to speak without words. In those moments, language became something entirely different, not built on sentences and phrases, but on the small, silent exchanges that pass between two people when everything else falls away, the way a breath can catch, the way a sigh can linger, the way skin responds to skin as though it's been waiting for this particular contact forever. There was something about the pauses that made everything more intense. In the quiet between movements, there was a depth of feeling that no amount of speed or urgency could match. It was in those moments of stillness that the truth of it sank in, that this wasn't just a meeting of bodies. This was belonging. This was the rare kind of closeness where two people stop existing as separate beings and begin to breathe in sync, as though sharing one heartbeat. His gaze had a softness that disarmed every defense, but it wasn't weak. It carried strength in the way it held without pressing, in the way it saw without demanding to know more than was freely given. That look felt like shelter, like the safest place in the world, and yet it was also the place where every wall built from past hurt began to crumble. It's strange how safety can make the heart brave again. The walls had been there for years, carefully constructed from the remains of old wounds, shaped by hands that had learned not to trust too easily. But they didn't fall in one violent crash. They dissolved slowly, almost without noticing, every time his hand brushed against a shoulder, every time his thumb lingered against the back of a hand, every time his lips found the corner of a mouth and stayed there, breathing in the closeness. Even in the moments when nothing was happening, when bodies were still, just existing side by side, there was a fullness that felt like everything. Breathing the same air felt intimate. Listening to the steady rhythm of his chest rising and falling felt like a language only we understood. There was no need to speak. Words might have only diluted the purity of it. The way his arms fit around was unlike anything else, not because they were strong, though they were, but because they didn't just hold. They wrapped around in a way that made the rest of the world disappear. That embrace wasn't a cage, it was a home. It was a reminder that love doesn't always need to be loud to be real. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the most lasting truths. The night stretched on, not in the restless way nights sometimes do, but in a way that felt infinite, as though time was reluctant to move forward and break the spell. Every movement was measured, not out of caution, but because neither wanted to miss a single moment. The connection wasn't something to race through. It was something to savor, to protect, to live fully inside of while it lasted. It was in the way his forehead rested against another's in the dark, in the way hands found their place without searching, in the way even the smallest shift in breath felt like a conversation. It was in the quiet joy of realizing that this exact moment, was enough. There was no thought of what came before or what might come next. There was only now, and it was perfect in its simplicity. And when the night finally began to fade into morning, there was no rush to break away, no sudden return to the noise of the world. The silence held on, lingering between them like a promise. Not all promises are spoken aloud. Some are felt in the steady beat of another's heart against your own. Some loves don't need to be loud to be unforgettable. Passion has its own language, but the kind that runs deeper than fire speaks in something slower, more deliberate, more certain. That night wasn't a blaze that burned fast and bright. It was the steady glow of a hearth that has been waiting to be lit for years, holding its warmth like a promise. It felt like stepping into a place that had always been there, somewhere beyond memory, a place where nothing had to be earned or proven, because belonging was already understood. The first kiss wasn't hurried, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Lips pressed together in a way that didn't just seek pleasure. It sought recognition, connection, the quiet confirmation that both hearts had found the right place to rest. Each breath between those kisses felt like a thread binding two souls closer together, weaving something invisible yet unbreakable. There was no need to rush, because the moment wasn't about getting somewhere. It was about sinking deeper into where we already were. Every touch felt intentional, not because of control, but because of presence. Hands traced along skin as though reading a sacred text, each curve and line familiar and yet newly discovered in the same heartbeat. There was no distance between touch and meaning. Every movement spoke of care, of a kind of reverence that made even the simplest gesture feel like worship. This wasn't a claiming, this was an honoring. The way bodies fit together felt like a truth too old and too deep to be learned. It was something remembered. Every shift, every sigh, every soft exhale carried with it unspoken vows, as if love itself was speaking through the way we moved. It wasn't about trying to impress or excite. It was about existing so close that every heartbeat became part of a shared rhythm. The world beyond that room didn't exist for those hours. Time softened, almost disappearing, as though it too wanted to stand still and watch. The night became a dance without steps, a song without melody, where every kiss was a verse and every touch was the chorus. It didn't need music because the sound of breathing, intertwined, uneven, desperate in moments and quiet in others, was enough to guide it. Desire was there, yes, but it wasn't wild in a way that demanded. It was wild in its devotion, its complete surrender. There was no fear of being seen too much, of revealing too much, because everything had already been laid bare long before skin met skin. This was not the start of something fragile that could be lost. It was the deep settling into something already rooted, already strong. The still moments were just as powerful as the ones filled with movement. The pause after a kiss, when foreheads touched and eyes stayed closed, carried as much weight as the passion itself. In those silences, trust was building quietly, growing like a flame sheltered from the wind. The simplest gestures, the way fingers intertwined, the way a thumb brushed over the back of a hand, spoke louder than any declaration could. Every part of the night felt like coming home after a long journey, the kind where the body aches but the heart knows it's safe now. The walls built from years of protecting what's tender inside came down, not with force, but with the gentle persistence of love that doesn't leave. It was impossible not to feel it, that slow, steady sinking of hearts, that shift from two separate beings into one shared life in that space. As the night stretched on, there was a quiet realization that intimacy in its truest form is not just about the closeness of bodies but the safety of souls. To be held in a way that says, without words, "You can rest here," that is rarer than passion and far more lasting. And when the final hours of darkness began to fade into morning light, there was no urge to pull away. Instead, there was stillness, warmth, and the deep, unshakable knowing that something had begun, not with fire that would burn out, but with a flame that would keep burning, steady and sure. Some nights are lived once and then gone. This one will live forever. Some nights arrive quietly, without warning, and yet they leave the kind of mark that changes everything. This one began without any sense of the weight it would carry. There was no plan, no expectation, only two people sharing the same space, breathing the same air, and slowly realizing that something was shifting beneath the surface. It wasn't the kind of shift that comes from sudden attraction or fleeting chemistry. It was something slower, deeper, the kind that feels like it's been waiting for years, silently biding its time until the right moment. Every glance, every small movement held an unspoken question, and each was answered not with words, but with something far more certain: presence. The first touch was almost nothing at all, just the brief brush of fingers, but it landed with a weight that made the heart stumble. That was when the realization began to take hold, that this night was going to be different. It wasn't about escaping reality. It was about finally stepping fully into it. Walls that had been carefully built over years didn't fall in an instant. They softened first. It was in the way eyes met without looking away, in the way silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. There was a steady unraveling happening, layers of fear, guardedness, and past hurt quietly slipping away without needing to be forced. It was the rare feeling of being seen completely and not flinching under the weight of it. There's a certain vulnerability that comes before love can truly be lived. It's the kind that demands trust, not the trust built over years of knowing someone's habits and patterns, but the trust that's born from a deeper instinct, a quiet recognition that this person will not break what is fragile inside. That trust was there, growing in every small moment. When lips finally met, it wasn't a rush or a claim. It was an opening, the kind of kiss that doesn't try to convince or consume, but simply holds and tells the truth without a single word. It was slow, deliberate, carrying the warmth of something that had nothing to prove. Every breath between those kisses was heavy with meaning, with the awareness that this wasn't just about wanting, it was about allowing. Touch followed naturally, each movement a question asked in the language of skin, and each met with a silent yes. There was no need for performance, no pressure to be anything other than real. The warmth of his hands, the steadiness of his embrace, all worked quietly to dismantle the last of the barriers, and once they were gone, there was no fear, only the comfort of being held without condition. The night moved like a tide, sometimes gentle and still, sometimes pulling with a force that made breathing feel impossible. But even in the most intense moments, there was tenderness. Every sigh, every brush of lips across skin felt like a vow. Not a vow to never hurt, because life can't promise that, but a vow to always meet vulnerability with care. There was a moment when the world outside seemed to disappear entirely, when it felt like the only thing that existed was the connection between them. Hearts fell into the same rhythm, breathing synced without effort, and every part of the body seemed to understand that it was exactly where it was meant to be. It was love not as an idea, but as a living, breathing presence that filled the room. Later, lying in the quiet aftermath, there was no need to speak. The truth had already been spoken in 1,000 unspoken ways. The closeness didn't fade when movement stopped. It lingered, settling deep into the bones, into the places where loneliness had once lived. It felt like hope, but not the fragile kind, This was hope rooted in something steady and real. That night became a turning point, not because of any grand gesture or declaration, but because it proved something that had once felt impossible, that it was still possible to love fully, to open completely, to live inside a moment without fear of it breaking. Every part of that night was a reminder that love isn't just something to feel, it's something to live, in every breath, every glance, every touch. And some nights once lived never leave you. If this story touched you, leave a like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more deep, soul-stirring moments of love. Your next unforgettable story starts here.